The impudence, the audacity, the unmitigated gall of those knuckleheads of liberty podcasters, daring to voice opinions outside the mainstream of accepted thought. Listen if you dare. It's angry, it's funny, it's even sometimes sad, but it's always based on freedom and justice, as you will see. Here's our host, Jason McPhee.
Welcome to the Knuckleheads of Liberty. We are coming at you on November 7th, 2022, just one day before the midterms. And it always feels like we're stepping one step further into Biden's abyss. But hey, maybe tomorrow there's a chance to anchor ourselves going a little farther in there. But today we actually have a special guest to talk to that can maybe give us a little bit of enlightenment on some of these issues. And that is Marc Victor, who is the U.S. Or the Libertarian U.S. Senate candidate from Arizona. And now he just stepped out, so that's kind of what we want to talk about as well. He's also the founder of the Live and Let Live Global Peace Organization and an attorney at law as well there. And we can get into all those things. But before we do, let me introduce you to our panel. In our upper left-hand corner, we have Leon, the word Brathwaite, last word in Liberty. He is a retired engineer in the state of California. In our upper right-hand corner, we have our screaming eagle of freedom, Tim Everett. He is a pilot in the state of California. And on our lower left-hand corner, we have Marc Victor, who we just introduced. And my name's Jason McPhee, and I'll be your host. So let's jump right into it. And Leon, maybe we could get up the visual here too. So Marc was, until just last week, was the Libertarian candidate for Senate in Arizona. And I guess he had anywhere between 3 and 6%, which is pretty impressive for a Libertarian there. And he also, managed to make the debate stage with them too, which is an impressive feat because it seems to be the elusive goal that almost all the Libertarians seem to get shut out of everywhere else. So that's great too. But Marc, do you want to tell us a little bit about your Senate run and what made you decide to run?
Yeah, thanks. And it's a real honor and pleasure to be on the Knuckleheads for Liberty podcast. And so I'm excited about that. But look, for about the last 30 years or so, I have been what you might call a freedom activist, which is, I'm a simple guy. I claim the right to own myself and my life. I say I'm the iron-fisted dictator of my body, my property, my money, and my time. And I've taken that position for really 30 years now. And I call myself sort of a lone wolf because I do my own thinking. But I've noticed there's a few other lone wolves out there who tend to agree and take exactly the same position. And so, after years of really being involved with the Libertarian Party and being somewhat involved in libertarian politics, I also ran for U.S. Senate in 2012 as a Libertarian. I started thinking about, why aren't we in the majority? I mean, for people who understand what it is I'll call the small L libertarian philosophy, the non-aggression principle, if you will, for people who understand that, it's sort of a no-brainer, right? I mean, don't aggress against other people. It doesn't seem like a hugely difficult argument. So I've been scratching my head for the last 10, 15 years, wondering why it is we're in the minority. And what occurred to me was we're at fault. And I take responsibility for this as well, because we libertarians don't do a very good job explaining our position to other people. Case in point, and I don't want to really call anybody out here, but I think it's a good example. Jo Jorgensen, when she ran for president as a libertarian just a few years back, I was asked to introduce her when she came to Phoenix. And I did, and I stayed for her speech. And a lot of people came because people were like, okay, I don't like the R, I don't like the D, what are these L's about? And so it was a really good gathering of people, and I was excited we could drag a whole bunch of people to our libertarian philosophy. But after an hour and a half of listening to Jo Jorgensen, it occurred to me she never even mentioned the one thing that makes a libertarian, the underlying principle, the thing that we agree on, the non-aggression principle. Never mentioned it. They start with all these positions, and I think that people say, well, okay, I like this one, I like that one. This seems like a pretty good cluster of stuff, like the Republicans and the Democrats do. But unless they understand the underlying principle, they're not one of us, if you will. They don't understand that we're pushing a philosophy, not just a political party. So I started giving speeches to libertarians that I called libertarian professionalism, right? Things like, let's stop arguing about little things that libertarians love to argue about. Things like, why do I agree aggression is wrong? Natural law, social contract, Ayn Rand, economics, your religion, whatever. It occurred to me, we don't need to argue about this. Whether you're a minarchist or an anarchist, okay, in my view, this isn't really very different a position. And I've been down many roads on this one as well. We don't need to argue about this. And so it occurred to me that we could very much simplify our position. And ultimately, this culminated into an article that I wrote. It was about guns, and I was explaining the non-aggression principle. And I said, look, there are many ways you can express the same idea. One of the ways is, the golden rule. I think it means exactly the same thing. Another way I said is live and let live. Well, when I said live and let live, people understood that. They intrinsically sort of like that phrase. It makes sense to them. I mean, who's against live and let live, right? What are you against, the live part or the let live part? So it occurred to me that it makes a lot more sense to explain our principle with the phrase live and let live rather than the phrase the non-aggression principle. Because, I've been speaking at the crossroads of the West gun shows here in Arizona for the last 25 years. And people hear non-aggression and they think, oh, I don't like that. I'm for self-defense. Okay, now I got to dig out of that hole and explain, no, it's the initiation of force. So I started running with live and let live. And the other thing that occurred to me that I think is a critically important point, and I think libertarians who have been libertarians for a long time recognize when another person understands our philosophy. This happens when they say things like, oh, I think prostitution is immoral. I think it's terrible. I would discourage people from doing it. It's bad for a whole host of reasons. But I think it should be legal because nobody's aggressing and I don't get to put my morality on other people. This notion that a legal rule and a moral rule are different things, like that's the big crux of the issue. And we libertarians only talk about legal rules. We don't talk about moral rules because libertarianism doesn't reach morality other than to say the morality of why you shouldn't aggress. And indeed, this was the dispute between the Libertarian Party and the Mises Conference, as the Libertarian Party wanted to, I would say, understandably leak in some statements about, racism is bad and wrong, and we should act certain ways towards other people. The Mises Conference, our caucus, came out and said, no, this is not part of libertarianism. And while this is true, it doesn't give us the most persuasive of arguments. So in starting a new movement, this live and let live movement, we added something that is not part of libertarianism, a moral principle. And we explain it with the short phrase, be a good human. It's completely optional, right? You can totally ignore it. That's the important educational experience about learning about live and let live. We don't go too far with this because people disagree on morality, but we're pushing some aspirational values, things like open-mindedness and tolerance and voluntary kindness towards others and civility and building high levels of trust with other people and being committed to the truth and facts, rational thought. And this all culminates in our overall goal here, which is to increase human happiness and well-being and decrease suffering. So adding a moral principle separate from a legal principle, and I don't refer to the non-aggression principle anymore. So now I'll call it the live and let live legal principle. It means the same thing, but we call it the live and let live legal principle. We also have a live and let live moral principle. And I point out this is entirely appropriate because while libertarianism is a freedom movement, and we get freedom when people don't aggress against others, live and let live is a peace movement, and peace requires something in addition to freedom, right? Besides not hitting each other over the head, there's something that we care a little bit about our fellow humans, right? Like, for example, Leon and I could be neighbors. We could be good libertarians, and I could say insults to him every morning when I see him. I hope you have a terrible day, Leon. And he could say, Mark, I feel the same horrible, mean-spirited way about you. As long as we don't trespass, we're good libertarians, right? There's no criticizing us as libertarians, and we're living in freedom for sure. but we're not living in peace with each other. I want to go for more here. I want to go for peace, and with peace, we need a moral principle. And the final point before I'll shut up is we don't live in Murray Rothbard's world or George Washington's world anymore, where we can really do the analysis with just our neighbors. We live in a global community now where substantial threats of risk, of harm, can emanate from anywhere in the world. We got things coming like artificial intelligence. We got things coming like what I call easy nukes. Soon people will be able to manufacture nukes from anywhere in the world. We have synthetic biology. Bad guys can engineer dangerous pandemics all over the world. We can't wait until the pandemic is sprung upon us. And so the goal of the Live and Let Live global peace movement is to unite what we call the reasonable people of the world around the live and let live philosophy, which includes the legal principle, which I don't have to tell you guys about, and the moral principle, which I just explained. And the main difference here, the educational point, it's totally voluntary. You can say, Mark, I hate everything about that moral principle, to which I'll say, you're free to live your life however you like, so long as you don't violate the legal principle, which we call rule number one. And that's the educational experience. And then finally, look, we're gaining momentum. We've got 10 different countries in Africa right now. We've got good groups in Portugal and in Poland and in the UK and in Canada. I believe, and I'll say it right here in front of the Knuckleheads for Liberty, the future of our movement is the Live and Let Live global peace movement. That's why I'm presenting it. That's why I ran for United States Senate, to get attention on what's most important, which is the Live and Let Live global peace movement.
Mark, I don't want to get too deep into the weeds, but I like your principle of live and let live, because I think you're right that libertarianism is about that very principle, living and letting your neighbor live also thing. Letting your neighbor also live a peaceful, wonderful life and all that. I believe in life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But does your philosophy, your live and let live philosophy, does it extend to the unborn?
Well, it's an excellent question. This is what we talk about with abortion. And I'm glad you raised it, because we should get it out. There are some other things that I'm adding, and I've added to the philosophy, that I think improves libertarianism. As we know, libertarians don't agree on this point. We have libertarians for life and libertarians for choice. And the reason they don't agree is because the question of when does our principle start protecting the unborn baby? When does this occur? That's a point upon which reasonable people can disagree. Some libertarians say it starts from the moment of conception. Okay, well, if the principle applies, then we go down a certain road. Some say, no, 15 weeks or viability or some point after. The difference between where you put that protection of the principle makes all the difference. So what I say here, which is the same thing I say on many different issues, age of consent is one of them. That's why I brought that up during the debate. What's a substantial risk is yet another one. There are so many such questions. So if we reach a question where reasonable minds disagree, the way to deal with this is to figure out the reasonable range where people disagree. So age of consent, for example, 19, 18, 17, maybe 16. Okay, those are reasonable choices. 8, that's not a reasonable choice. 35, that's not a reasonable choice. Let's come up with the range of where reasonable people disagree, and then let's let the smallest of communities make that decision and resolve the question like that. But that's not the end of the analysis. That's the beginning, because now we use our economic brains and say, well, what happens next? Okay, the low transaction cost to move out of one community, low transaction cost to not do business with that community. Let's get market forces on that particular reasonable construction that was selected in the local community. And let's see if we can kind of coalesce around one or two different rules. And then maybe when there's enough agreement, it goes back to sort of a state level decision and we move forward from there. Lots of things I like about that resolution. Most importantly, most importantly, it gets us to stop fighting about these kinds of issues, because our goal should be to get the reasonable people of the world to just accept the general philosophy, how we implement it, and also I'll add how we transition. Imagine we got everybody on board with our philosophy. There are still disputes. Do we abolish taxes in one swoop right now? Do we transition? How do we transition? What do we stop first? There's all these reasonable disputes about transition, about implementation. I don't want to fight with my fellow brother and sister, live and let liver or libertarian, about those issues. We're so far away from that right now. Let's just get them to coalesce around the general principle, and a secondary argument, which is, I don't get my interpretation of this stuff all over the world. What do I want? What would I be happy with? Give me at least a reasonable construction, even one I don't agree with, but give me a reasonable construction of our principle everywhere I'm standing on planet Earth, and I'm thrilled. I will declare victory and go home, and maybe don't visit those places that have the wrong reasonable construction of our rule. That's as bad as it gets. That's a world I'm happy to live in.
Well, Mark, one of the things you had said early on when you started talking was, how come we're not doing a better job, I guess, getting this across to the majority of the population? And it seems to me a big part of the issue is with governments having a monopoly over the schools, that people just sort of tend to come out with these ideas that all solutions have to come from government, that whatever we do, let's just vote on it. We'll figure out something through government, when, I think as libertarians, most of us realize that it's market decisions. But the thing is, we don't learn that in school. It takes us something outside of school. And that brings up a question I had for you is, what is it that rung your Liberty bell? What caused you to wake up to these ideas? Did you learn it in school, or did you wake up to it like some of us did by, maybe Milton Friedman or Murray Rothbard or somebody else like that?
Well, I guess I started life, everyone in my family was a Democrat. I'm from Massachusetts, and I was raised in a Jewish cultural background. You can imagine East Coast, Jewish, Massachusetts, everybody I knew and everybody they knew was a Democrat. So this caused me to be a Republican right from the beginning, without knowing anything about what the Republicans stood for. I just said, well, if everybody's a Democrat, I don't want them telling me. I was that kind of a kid, I like to call this a Lionheart libertarian, somebody who's always been a libertarian. Somebody who likes to ask why. Well, that was me. And then I started listening to what the Republicans were saying, and then I thought, I actually like this. Ronald Reagan and Rush Limbaugh were talking about rugged individualism, and all this sounded great to me. And then I had a few nagging things, the drug war didn't quite make sense. And that's kind of where I was when I went into law school. And I was very fortunate. This is one of the luckiest things probably that's ever happened to me, but I ran into Professor Butler Schaefer. And Butler described himself as an anarchist, an anarcho-capitalist, a voluntarist. He was one of these guys, knew Murray Rothbard, knew Ayn Rand, knew everybody in the libertarian movement, and was really eloquent at explaining it. And he took my brain out and reorganized it and put it back in. We went through this series of, hey, Butler, if the government stopped doing X, we'd have this gigantic problem, to which he always responded, sounds right, Mark, we would have a gigantic problem. And I would think, see, your philosophy doesn't work. And then he would say, what do you think would happen next, Mark? And I had never thought about this. And so I scratched my head and said, well, probably that. And then he would say, well, what do you think would happen after that? He got me to think my way through how we could have, as he said, a civilized, productive, prosperous society without hitting each other over the head. And I became sold on the concept that aggression is wrong. And then, like everybody else, we start thinking through the problems from there. And it occurred to me that, yes, I believe we can have a prosperous, peaceful effect. The only way we can have a peaceful society or a free society is, in fact, that's how you define a free society, the extent to which the laws are calibrated around that principle. If they're more calibrated, then you will have a prosperous society. You'll be the #1 economy in the world. You'll have the #1 military in the world, and you'll be a superpower. That's the magic that made the United States the United States. We did a better job calibrating our laws around the principle, not perfect, lots of areas we can improve in, but better than North Korea, better than Greece, better than Venezuela. That's why they have broken economies and we have a better economy, at least, than they have relative. How could we make it better? We know the answer, right? We could move more in the direction against aggression. So the school thing you raised, I think this is a big deal, and I'm going to move a little bit, advance the conversation a little bit. Some people got cranky with me when I stepped down for running for the United States Senate. But the reason I did that, as I've said from the beginning, this isn't about Marc Victor getting elected to anything. It ain't about Marc Victor at all. The reason I do this is because I care very deeply about the future of the human race. And that's why I'm pushing the Live and Let Live movement. And if I said, if either of the two candidates, whether it's Senator Mark Kelly or Blake Masters, if they're willing to talk to me and they'll convince me that it's better, it's more in the interest of what I care about to step down and endorse them, then I'll do it. And I put out the challenge right away. Some people say, Mark, why'd you wait so long? I didn't wait. I put it out right after the debate. And I said, the only way I'm doing it, though, is I'm going to have a real conversation. Nothing's off the table. No private pre-meetings, none of that. I want the whole thing recorded. And I'm not making any promises. I may not endorse your guy. So Blake Masters, last Monday, just a week from when we're recording now, said, we'll sit down. He called my campaign. They tried calling me. I said no.
And real quick, just to jump in, Leon, can you put up the visual? Because actually Reason put up an interesting article about this, and they show the picture of you and Blake Masters sitting down together. And I thought that was, I just listened to the conversation. I thought that was great. But yeah, go ahead.
And people should watch that, by the way. They should, if you are feeling some aggravation or strife or something about why did Mark, who, by the way, was up to 15% in the polls at one point with one poll, and might have done even better than that. Do I think I would have been elected? Probably not. So that's a big factor in the calculation, right? But if they go to liveandletlive.com, Live and Let Live Revolution. It's my political website, liveandletliverevolution.com. You can watch the entire 20-minute conversation. Now, look, I didn't love 20 minutes. That wasn't really long enough. And so you'll see it's a very rushed conversation. It's not exactly the way I would have done it, but I ticked through a lot of issues. And one of those issues, Jason, is what you raised, separation of school and state. He was great on that. He said, yes, it should be separated. Yes, we should abolish the Department of Education. I love that position. That is so important if we're going to teach people how to think. And if they can't think, we can't really reason with them and convince them about our position. He was in favor of that. He was in favor of many things, sound money. I like everything he had to say on the economy. Abolish the Fed, at least audit the Fed, get back to sound money, to me is very important. He was great on foreign policy. He wasn't perfect on everything. He's not a libertarian, although he promised to give me 3 hours to talk to him. And if I can sit him down, put him in a headlock and go like this with our principal, I think I can get him to move much more in our direction. So all of these things put together made me feel like if I step down, it's in the interest of what I care about, which is pushing Live and Let Live. He said in the interview that libertarian theory is correct. He said that twice. He said I could count on him to be a Live and Let Live senator from Arizona. He's pushing Live and Let Live. Okay, it's not ideal, but that's better for freedom than me continuing on and maybe getting Mark Kelly elected, who certainly seemed far worse than Blake Masters. So I took a lot of heat from everybody on this. But it's not about me. It's about what's in the interest of the freedom movement and the peace movement. So that's why I did what I did.
It sounds to me like from that story, especially originally, that if Marc Victor was a naval aviator, his call sign would write across the top of his helmet, Maverick.
Well, actually, I'll see you and raise you because no disrespect to naval aviators or anyone in the Navy, but I was in the Marine Corps, and to me, that's the most important branch of the military. So yes.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with that. I agree with
my
that.
own drum. I call myself a lone wolf. I say I'm not loyal to any party platform, period. What I'm loyal to are the principles of freedom and peace. That's what I care about. And I will do whatever I can peacefully do without sacrificing a bit of my integrity every possible thing I can do to get us in that direction. That's what I'm doing, notwithstanding what the National Libertarian Party wants me to do, or the Mises Caucus wants me to do, or anybody else wants me to. I remain open-minded to other approaches, and I certainly would consider the views of any other person, but that was my judgment. We'll see how it turns out. I hope it turns out in the right direction. It may not. I think it will. But that's why I did what I did. I care about freedom and peace, and it's not about getting me elected or self-aggrandizement or egoism or any of that other stuff.
Well, it's funny, because I listened to the discussion you had with him, and on most things, he sounded pretty close to being a libertarian. Not quite. I mean, he was sort of still locked up on the drug war thing. It sounded like, when you had your conversation with him. But he's for sound money. He's for free markets. He's for eliminating tax, cutting debt, balanced budget, no nation building abroad. He's against the COVID mask, vaccines, and mandates, and he said those should be a crime. As far as those being mandates, no lockdowns, no federal loans, just one thing after another. Privatizing Social Security, he wants to sort of ease toward that. So it really sounds like, pragmatically, it almost sounds like he's in that sort of Ron Paul, Massey type of mold almost. Maybe he'll fit in well with those guys.
Yeah, and a couple of points here. First off, Ron Paul endorsed him before I made my decision, so that had carried some weight for me. But a couple of points. First off, the answer that he gave me that I thought was the best, that a lot of people I think didn't pay attention to, was his answer on euthanasia, which was at the end. This one, he said very clearly, look, I got personal religious views on this that very clearly were anti-euthanasia views. But then he said the most important thing he could have said, which was essentially, I don't want to put my personal moral views into the law and force them on other people. Okay, if you want to maintain that position, I don't care how you feel personally on any of these things, right? That's what I've been saying as I've been running. Don't ask me about my personal position because it doesn't matter. I'm not trying to put that into the law. That was the most important answer I think he gave. And then secondarily, if I get to sit down with this guy for 3 hours, I can show him within 60 seconds how his somewhat disappointing answer on the drug war was totally wrong, right? And look, if he wants to say back to me, Mark, I'm a politician, I'm trying to get elected, okay, fine. That's a tactic. That's a strategy. I am more forgiving of different tactics to getting us towards freedom. But, I also got to say, I can't tell you how disappointed I was with the libertarian, generally speaking, the libertarian reaction to everything I've done here. I feel like I got more attention for libertarianism nationally and maybe internationally than probably anybody has done since Ron Paul. Nobody can point to one word I've said anywhere, and I put this challenge out to everybody, including the Knuckleheads for Liberty. Find something that I said in the last 30 years, not just this campaign. Anywhere, anything, and there's a lot of information on my campaign website about a lot of issues. Find one word I said that wasn't consistent with libertarianism, and yet I got nothing but aggravation from the libertarians the whole time.
Well, unfortunately, we're about out of time, but Leon, if you could throw up the website real quick and go to liveandletlive.org if you want to check out some more of Mark's ideas. And we're going to have Mark on another show real soon. So until then, stay free.
Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, always and forever.
Thank you for listening to the Knuckleheads of Liberty podcast. Find us on Facebook, Rumble, YouTube, your favorite podcast network, and at knuckleheadsofliberty.com.